Mit Feuer und Flamm hat man uns gebrennt. Überall hat man uns gemacht zu Schand, zu Spott. Doch abzutreten von uns hat keiner nicht gekannt. Von dir, unser Gott, mit dein heiliger Teure. Von unser Gebot, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Tag und Nacht nach ich tracht von dir, mein Gott. Ich hielt mit Meure ab dein Teure, dein Gebot. Rette uns wie amol, fahr unser Avos, wie Avos Avaisenu, mein Gebet und mein Gewehen, weil helfen kennst du, nur Gott allein. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Schanzer, and the new Cracow Friendship Society welcomes you to the 78th commemoration of the liquidation of the Cracow Ghetto. This year's annual event has been organized in collaboration with the Galicia Jewish Museum, the JCC Krakow, and the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. And I am very fortunate to be involved with all of these wonderful organizations. Thank you for joining us today for a live tour of the Cracow Ghetto and a memorial service. We will remember those who perished in the ghetto with the reading of their names and the sharing of in the placing of stones at one of the ghetto sites. Our candle lighting ceremony at the remaining ghetto wall is where we will honor all those who died in the Holocaust with a moment of silence, followed by a scrolling of names of our society's family members who perished. May their memory be for a blessing. We hope that you will find this program meaningful, along with its musical accompaniments. I am delighted to now introduce my good friend, Jonathan Ornstein, the Executive Director of the JCC Krakow. Jonathan.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody who tuning in from all over the world. It's a shame that we can't be here this year together in Krakow, but the positive side is that we have, I think, greater numbers than we're usually able to do. So it's wonderful to see this turnout. It's an honor for us, the JCC Krakow, to be able to partner with the new Cracow Friendship Society, the Galicia Jewish Museum, and the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue, and all of you who are joining us. This tragic day 78 years ago, of course, still reverberates throughout the world, and especially here, if you think about it, in Krakow, in our community, as we work very hard not only to commemorate, but to take care of the living that are still here. And I think it's important to note, even on a day when we're focused on commemoration, that just as we have a responsibility to commemorate, we also have a responsibility to try to do what we can and take care of the survivors around the world and here in Krakow. So I'm happy that we're able to do both. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce a very close friend of mine, the wonderful Jakub Nowakovski, who is the director of the Galicia Jewish Museum.
Jonathan, thank you. Elizabeth, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great privilege to be here today with you. Galicia Jewish Museum was founded back in 2004. It's a non-profit organization. In 2019 had more than 70,000 visitors, and we could talk about our activity. But the mission of the museum is to commemorate the past, but also to describe the contemporary Jewish Poland. And I think this event is encapsulating this mission as it shows the memory, not only through the objects or monuments, but most of all through living people. As Jonathan said, if not for the COVID, we would have met here in Krakow to mourn, to remember, but also just to be together. This could not happen. And yet here we are, symbolically together, connecting from various places and time zones, Jews, but also non-Jews, united to remember and to honor. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Elizabeth, Steve, and Jonathan for doing this together. It's an honor. Before we start the ceremony, let's take the virtual tour of the former ghetto. The tour is organized by Wokatif Tour Guide Company. And let me introduce Małgorzata Fus, Wokatif founder and director, and most of all, an excellent guide who will be the one that will take us for that tour. The tour is live, so please excuse us any glitches and possible technical problems, but we hope we'll avoid those. You can also write questions and comments in the chat, and Małgorzata will do her best to answer them. So once again, thank you very much for joining us. Małgorzata, thank you for doing the tour. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Małgorzata. To simplify things, the shorter version is Gosia. I am very honored to be here with you to show you the area of Krakow's Ghetto. I cooperate both with JCC Krakow, with the Galicia Jewish Museum, where I worked for 10 years in the education department. Now I run a guiding company here in Krakow that is called Wokatif. We're involved in, of course, we're showing people around Krakow, around Podgórze, around Kazimierz, but we are also involved in commemoration activities here also around the ghetto, which I want to show you later and tell you about. But of course, we are here to discuss the history of Krakow's ghetto. So let me first tell you where we are. Where we are standing and what you see around is the main square of former town called Podgórze. Podgórze today is a part of Krakow, but once it was a separate town. And this is exactly where the Germans created ghetto during Second World War. This is not a historical Jewish neighborhood, but this is exactly where the ghetto was created. So before we move and before we walk around the ghetto, along the streets of the ghetto, let me say a few things what happened before the ghetto creation. So as we all know, 1st of September 1939, the Germans attacked Poland. 6th of September 1939, the German troops entered Krakow, and anti-Jewish regulations started to be introduced within days. So 3 days after the Germans entered Krakow, from 9th of September, every Jewish shop, every Jewish business had to be marked with the Star of David. Later, from December 1939, every Jewish woman, men, children, they all had to mark themselves with armband with Star of David. You all know this, but this is something that was happening before the creation of the ghetto. Krakow, during the Nazi occupation, was a capital of German-occupied Poland. So this is where German administration, this is where German officials were coming. This is where they were living. From here, they were ruling occupied Poland. And because of that, Krakow was supposed to be Judenrein, clean of the Jews, free of the Jews. And already in 1940, out of 65,000 Krakow's Jews, this was the number of Jewish people here in Krakow before the Second World War. Out of this number, 65,000, only 15,000 people were allowed to stay in Krakow. The rest were forced to move out. The Germans did not care where these people are going to go. They were forced to move out from Krakow. Those who stayed were working for the Germans, or most of them, those who stayed, were working for the Germans. And for these people, next year, in 1941, the ghetto was created. The order that was announcing creation of the ghetto was issued on 3rd of March. And Jewish people of Krakow got time from 3rd of March to 20th March to move to the ghetto. This was a very short time. This is the moment also where non-Jews who had been living here are forced to move out, and people from Krakow, Jewish people from Krakow, are forced to move in. So we are standing now outside of the ghetto, but I'm going to show you now exactly where the ghetto was starting once. So you can see this building over there, this impressive building, yellow building. This was the edge of the ghetto. This yellow building and the one on the other side of the streets, if you look over there, this is exactly where the main gate leading to the ghetto was standing. Through this gate, people were entering, but you will also see in a moment tram running here. Maybe you can already hear it, hear the sound. This is exactly also where trams were entering the ghetto, speeding through the ghetto. Of course, they were not used by the Jews. They were used by ethnic Poles who were heading to their work outside of the ghetto. Of course, Poles also working for the Germans, they were going through the ghetto. We have reports of people knowing that there will be some people that they know, friends on the tram, and they would throw out some things to help, potatoes, something like that. But anyways, this is the main gate leading to the ghetto. And this is where police was also guarding it from the outside, Polish Navy police and German police. From the inside, the Jewish police. This was also, this building, this yellow building right here, this was also a place where Judenrat, where the Jewish Council had their offices. Let me show you where the entrance to the Judenrat was. I'm sure you all know what was the task of Judenrat. In every ghetto, there was this body, there was this Jewish council that was supposed to administer the ghetto. But their task was gruesome. They had to pass the German orders. They could do nothing about them, but they had to impose them on the Jewish population of the ghetto. So here we are already crossing the border. This is exactly where the gate was, and we are now moving inside of the ghetto. was also to make sure that numbers of people who were supposed to be deported was exactly the number the Germans wanted. And this is why the second president of Judenrat, Arthur Rosenzweig, was killed in Bełżec's death camp. The Germans accused him of failing to fulfill their orders, and he and his family, they were forced to join people who were being deported to death camp called Bełżec. Of course, we'll talk about the deportations a little bit later, but after Arthur Rosenzweig, the man who was in charge of the ghetto was David Guter, and this was the person who was doing exactly what the invaders, the Germans, wanted from him. Now, to walk along the border of the ghetto, we're again on Rynek Podgórski, and this is, maybe I'll go to the other side so we can see the building. This is exactly where the border of the ghetto was. Number two, the building right over there, this is where the German radio, the German police station was located. And right next to it, Rynek Podgórski number 3. This is where one of the very important factories in the ghetto was located. Probably you are familiar with Oskar Schindler, with the movie. There were many people who survived, many Krakow Jews who survived the war thanks to Oskar Schindler. But there was another man who was also depicted in the movie, whose name was Julius Madrid. And this is exactly where his factory was located. Julius Madrid was an Austrian man who came here to Krakow when the war started, when the occupation started. And he owned a factory that was a workshop that was sewing uniforms for the German army. Not only uniforms, but mainly. And this is something that was crucial during the ghetto times for the Jewish people, to have job that was something that the German army was profiting from, right? So uniforms, making uniforms, this was something important. But Julius Madrid, he would give his workers extra food. He would give them protection as well. And here on the territory of his factory, also people and their families, his workers and their families were able to survive deportations from Krakow's ghetto. Julius Madrid, after Second World War, was recognized righteous among the nations. Let's go. In a moment, we will enter the actual ghetto. We'll enter lovely streets that is called Rękawka. And this street was remembered by many people who went through Krakow's ghetto. You'll see in a moment why. It's a short street, and it's very close to hills. If Piotr can show us a little bit over there, you can see that going up there, there are hills up that street. So ghetto was located between natural borders, between river and hills. Purpose, they created ghetto here in Podgórze because this district had natural borders, and it was easy for them to close people here, to control them here. Kazimierz, so historical Jewish neighborhood, was a place that was very close to the old town of Krakow. Old town of Krakow that the German Nazis took over for themselves as it was the most elegant, the most beautiful part of Krakow. So this is, of course, where the Nazis wanted to live, and this is Jewish families would lose their apartments, homes over there when the Germans entered. So on this street, Rękawka Street, you can see typical houses here in Podgórze. Also here in number 2, the building that you see exactly in front of you, this is where Roman Polański as a child lived in Krakow's ghetto. He managed to escape, survived the war, of course. Now also, if you look over there, if Piotr shows us the streets, you can see that there's a bit of trees, a grass. This was the only such place within Krakow's ghetto, the only green space within Krakow's ghetto. That is why inhabitants of Krakow's ghetto would call this street Ghetto Promenade. And this is where people who are in love would go for a walk, cuddling, kissing sometimes, kissing out in open, something that was totally unacceptable before the war. But of course, life, love, parties, this is something that would be in the ghetto, of course, until certain moment, until deportations started. But this is exactly where lovers would come for a walk. This is where kids would come to play. So this street, Rękawka Street, was called Ghetto Promenade. Let's go down now. This street, called Węgierska Street. I wanted to walk through the street because, as you probably all know, in October 1939, so almost immediately, the German Nazis closed all of the synagogues, and religious services, Jewish religious services, were forbidden. Of course, it doesn't mean that people would not meet for religious services, that people would not meet for prayers. Here, you can see on the other side of the street, you can see beautiful Cukar synagogue, building from late 19th century. Here in Podgórze, there was a Jewish community before the war, long time before the war, and this was their main synagogue, but this was not the only one. Here on this street, number 6, Węgierska 6, Węgierska 7, there were also smaller prayer houses. And when this synagogue was, of course, closed in October 1939, those little stiebels, little synagogues, would still function. And still, even during the ghetto times, people would meet for prayers in secret. This was, of course, one of the ways they could remain who they are. So walking through Węgierska Street, we'll in a moment reach Limanowskiego. I'm giving you those names, hoping that if your people, if your family was here at some point, then if your family was in Krakow's ghetto, then maybe those names, those streets, they mean something for you. Maybe your family members would live on some of those streets. So we are getting closer to Limanowskiego Street, which was the biggest and the longest street in Krakow's ghetto. But also after June deportation, this became the border of the ghetto. When deportation started and there were, in result, less and less people in Krakow's ghetto, of course, these people were not allowed to have such a big space. And ghetto would be diminished in size after each deportation. And so what we saw over there and the ghetto promenades and this nicer section of Podgórze of the ghetto, this was cut out from Krakow's ghetto after June deportation, and this street was the border of the ghetto. So now we are entering the space, the area that was in the ghetto from the beginning till the end. We are on Węgierska Street, but are now moving to Józefińska. Józefińska was a very important street for the inhabitants of Krakow's ghetto, because this is where several important institutions in Krakow's ghetto existed. One of them we are reaching in a moment was a hospital. Hospital, and next to it there was a ward for chronically ill. These places had very devoted doctors. Even the Germans in Krakow, German officials in Krakow, were in shock that there were no outbreaks of epidemics here in the ghetto. And it was exactly because of very devoted staff of this hospital and several other hospitals that existed here in Ghetto. Very devoted nurses and personnel, hospital personnel, who would tell people exactly what to do in order to avoid epidemics. And there were no epidemics in Krakow's ghetto, and even the German authorities were in shock. So this was one of the hospitals. And if we look over there, the yellow building over there, this is where the ward for chronically ill was located. This is where during June deportation, nearly 500 people were hiding, thanks to cleverness of doctors who managed to hide them under beds, under piles of blankets and so on. And about 500 people survived the June deportation. But this is also in that yellow building over there. This is also where Arbeitsamt existed. Arbeitsamt, I mentioned just a bit that working for the war effort could save your life if you were in the ghetto. But Arbeitsamt was a place where people would get their job assignments. Let me check the time, so I'm not late. Now, walking again through Józefińska Street, we are next to other important institutions. So over there, we can see another beautiful building, like the one that we saw where Judenrat was located. In this building, there were the offices of Jewish social self-help organization. This organization was chaired by Michał Weichert, and it was quite controversial, to be honest. So the self-help organization was allowed by the Germans to receive subventions, to receive money, to receive food, to receive medicine from charitable organizations from outside of occupied Poland, from the West in general. So International Red Cross, the Joint. But this was all happening in order for this to happen, for the help to arrive here in the ghetto, Michał Weichert had to cooperate with the Germans. He would have to meet with them a number of times. They were writing documents. The Germans were writing documents that he would need to sign. They were writing letters to International Red Cross, to the Joint, and so on, that he would have to sign. Of course, this help on the way most of it was stolen. Only about 10 up to 30% of the parcels of the packages that were sent to occupied Poland to help the Jews here, only about 10 up to 30% would arrive here. Now, according to Jewish fighting organization, according to the underground organization to the resistance in Krakow and Warsaw Ghetto, Michał Wejherzch was a traitor because he helped Germans to say to the world outside, the Jews are here, they are in need of your help, but they are still here. So send those parcels, send the money, send help. And Jewish fighting organization even decided that Michał Wejherzch has to be killed. It did not happen, but after the war, Wejherzch managed to survive. And after the war, there were several trials that he would have to go through to defend his good name. And eventually, he was recognized not guilty. There were enough people who could say that thanks to his help, thanks to, for example, even later in Płaszów, thanks to the soups that he would provide. People would call it zupa Jusowa, the soup from this organization. They were able to survive. So at the end, he was able to clear his name. But you can also see the type of dilemmas that people would have to go through. There is a question about those buildings, whether they're original or not, or were rebuilt after the war. You see, Krakow is original. What you see around here, these are the buildings where people lived during the ghetto. These are the original buildings. Krakow was not destroyed during Second World War. It was not destroyed when the Germans came. It was not destroyed during the war. There was no resistance. There was no uprising here. It was not destroyed after the war when Soviets were coming. So all these buildings that we are passing, all these buildings that we are looking at are original buildings. Okay. Now, interestingly, here we have the building of Jewish social self-help organization. And you remember that I mentioned that the underground, that the resistance decided that Michał Wejherzch is a collaborator and he has to be killed. Now you can see this building, Józefińska number 13. This is where kids, because we have to say kids, these were very young people who were involved in Jewish fighting organization. This was one of the locations where they would meet. So these people were living right next to each other. But talking about that, ghetto was very, very small. Here in this neighborhood, before the establishment of the ghetto, around 3,000 mostly non-Jews lived. And then when the ghetto was created in 1941, officially 15,000, you remember 15,000 Jews were allowed to remain in Krakow, and for them the ghetto was created. But this is an official number. The Germans, when they were creating the ghetto, they would never mention word ghetto. They called this place a Jewish living quarter, Jüdischer Wohnbezirk in Yiddish. No one would use word ghetto. So many people who, before the creation of the ghetto, would be beaten, attacked on the streets of Krakow, would think that living in a Jewish living quarter would be safer for them. So the ghetto was established for 15,000 people officially, but it is estimated that around 4,000 people entered the ghetto illegally. So in reality, here in this place where before the war, 3,000 people had been living during the ghetto times, around 19,000 people were living. So around this area, there's 320 buildings, a little more than 3,000 rooms. So in those 3,000 rooms, you had nearly 19,000 people living. So of course, this was the first and main problem of the people who were locked here in Krakow's ghetto: lack of space, terrible living conditions. Now, we are on the crossroads of Józefińska and Krakowska Street. And I wanted to stop here just for a moment to show you this, to show you the streets. Now, you probably heard those stories of people escaping from the ghetto through sewers. This is something that was happening towards the end of the ghetto. So I was talking about life, about love, about people walking, about kids playing on Rękawka streets. But this is the initial part of the ghetto existence. Towards the end, people would be more and more aware of what their fate would be. And during the final days, when the ghetto was being liquidated in 1943, many people would try to escape in this way, through sewers. There's even famous story of Professor Julian Alexandrovich, who escaped from Krakow's ghetto through sewers. Now, I was telling you about this dilemma that Weihert had. He's signing documents that the Germans are writing, and they're sending them out to the world. Now, listen to the other dilemma. Julian Alexandrovich, who was a doctor, he was in the ghetto with his wife, with his little son, and with his parents. And during the final days of the ghetto existence, he decided that he's going to escape. His wife agreed, but his father, his elderly father, did not want to step down there to the sewers and escape in this way. And at the end, Julian's mother decided to stay with her husband in the ghetto, even though they knew what is going to happen, even though they knew that they are going to die. And Julian had to decide to abandon his parents, his elderly parents, in order to save his wife and his son. So this is, again, some of the dilemmas that people would have to solve. Let's go. So of course, I mentioned a bit about how overcrowded the ghetto was. So and you can see those buildings around here. You can see that some of them are in quite terrible shape. This was not a rich neighborhoods. This was quite poor industrial area. And during the ghetto times, usually in one room, between 2 up to 4 families were living together. And of course, we cannot think of a family in today's standards, mother, father, and 1 child. Generations would live together. The second, of course, issue was food. And daily food stamps for the Jewish inhabitants of Krakow would provide 250 calories, or about 250 calories. 250 calories is just one small donut, basically. But of course, many things would be smuggled, especially by children, sneak out and buy, steal something outside of the ghetto, beg for something outside of the ghetto, and then smuggle it to this closed neighborhood. Of course, these kids and people who were sneaking out from the ghetto without having permissions to do so, they were risking their lives, because after the establishment of the ghetto in March 1941, any Jew who was found outside of the ghetto without having permission to do so, was killed immediately without asking any questions. Now we are getting to the most important, but I'm looking for a right word, the most tragic also section of Krakow's ghetto. We are getting to Plac Zgody. But before we talk about Plac Zgody, so Agreement Square before the war, today it's called Plac Bohaterów Getta, so Square of Ghetto Heroes. Let me say a few words about this place. Now, Krakow's ghetto was unusual because the Germans allowed non-Jewish Pole that you see on this poster or on this photograph right here, Tadeusz Pankiewicz, they allowed him to live permanently here in Krakow's ghetto. So Tadeusz Pankiewicz was a pharmacist, and his father had owned this pharmacy long time before the war, and Tadeusz Pankiewicz took the pharmacy from his father and ran it. And then when the ghetto was created, all of a sudden his pharmacy was right in the middle of it. We don't know exactly why the Germans allowed Pankiewicz to stay in his pharmacy. We suspect, or historians suspect, that they did it on purpose, that the pharmacy was here in order to stop epidemics from spreading. If you think that Krakow is a capital of German-occupied Poland, that the highest Nazi officials are moving in here, settling down here, Hans Frank, who's in charge of general government, who lives at the Wawel Castle like a king, they're just few minutes away from here. And even though the ghetto was walled, of course, we'll see fragment of the war later on. Even though the ghetto was walled, you cannot stop epidemics with walls. So probably Pankiewicz was allowed to stay here, so the epidemics would be under control thanks to medicine, thanks to also the pharmacy. But this place was a place where, first of all, people would meet. This was like, people would call it an embassy of pre-war worlds, because stepping in here, people could feel that, you know, they turn out the time and it's again before the war, and they can address themselves culturally, they can have conversations, they feel like everything is more or less normal. So would discuss their situation here. This was a place where many artists, where many professors would meet, intelligentsia of the ghetto would meet. But Pankiewicz also would, so this is one function of the pharmacy. But Pankiewicz would also give people medicine for free. During deportations, he would hide people here in his pharmacy. So he hid several very old, very important Torah scrolls. So this was really, really important place in Krakow's ghetto. And Pankiewicz was recognized righteous among the nations also after the war. And today in his pharmacy, there is a museum that tells his story and the story of Krakow's ghetto. Now, if we turn over there, if you look over there, you can see that Tadeusz Pankiewicz, from his pharmacy, he would see everything that was happening here, everything that was happening on the square. So I mentioned the name of the square, a square of the ghetto heroes today and before the war, Plac Zgody, so the agreement square. Now, we need to spend some time here because this square is a place where most terrible atrocities would be committed. So I was mentioning several times deportations from Krakow's ghetto. So again, you remember that ghetto is established in 1941, March 1941. And at the beginning, despite the terrible living conditions, lack of food, people try to live here. And they meet for parties, they meet for religious festivals. We talked about this a little bit. But things started to change in 1942 with deportations from Krakow's ghetto. There were two mass deportations from Krakow's ghetto in June 1942 and then in October 1942. June deportation lasted for 8 days, started on 1st of June and it was done on 8th of June. Now, the Germans who entered the ghetto, before the deportation, they were not here. They would rarely come. But beginning of June, 1st of June, the German troops entered the ghetto. And they started to spread rumors. Nobody wanted to have panic here. So they started to spread rumors that because ghetto is so overcrowded, people need to be taken from here and they're going to be taken to labor camps in the east. And those who were taken from the ghetto were supposed to gather here on this square. This was the biggest open space in the ghetto. So to come, they could take their luggage. There was maximum 25 kilos for each person. But now this is, if you think that you are allowed to take luggages with you, this is something reassuring that you're going to use those things at some point. So people come here, those who are being selected by the Germans who do not work for the war effort are to come here to the square. And they are, according to those rumors, these people are going to be sent to labor camps in the east, in the area of today's Ukraine. But what is happening on the square tells people a little bit of what their fate is going to be. Germans start to select also people here, elderly people, babies, pregnant women are being killed right on this square because from here, transports are heading straight to Bełżec death camp. Bełżec was not like Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, there were selections. In Auschwitz, you had a tiny chance of surviving the selection. In Bełżec, there was none of such things. In Bełżec, people were killed immediately upon their arrival. But from here, from Krakow, they were sent to Bełżec in cattle cars. Usually there were around 100 people in a cattle car. No food, no water. It's hot, it's June. Today, if you want to drive a car, rent a car and drive to Bełżec, the journey takes about 4 or 5 hours. Back in those days, back during the deportation in 1942, it was several days. So it was pretty obvious already here on the square that not all of these people are going to survive the journey. That is why elderly people, pregnant women, sick babies were killed right on the square. Deportation lasted for 8 days. It's very hard to say exactly how many people were murdered here on the square. We know there are around 7,000 people during the June deportation were taken to Bełżec and killed, murdered there. Then a second deportation took just 1 day. It was 28th of October, 1942. And because it's 1 day, it's easier for historians to estimate how many people were killed, and they estimate that around 600 people were killed within several hours, and around 4,500 people were again taken to Bełżec. And then Ghetto lasted till March 1943, when it was liquidated. The liquidation took 2 days, 13 and 14 of March 1943. On 13 of March, those people who were still fit to work were told to walk to newly established Płaszów camp. But for example, parents who had children here, children who did not work, children below the age of 14, were told to leave their children. They're, of course, unemployed children in the ghetto. Of course, many mothers, many parents, many fathers did not want to do so. And despite on 13th of March, they were allowed to go to Płaszów. These people decided that they are not going to abandon either their elderly parents or their children. Some were trying to smuggle their children into Płaszów. But those who remained here on 14th of March, this was the day. So exactly 78 years ago, this was the day when those who remained in the ghetto were either shot on the spot, and then their bodies were buried in Płaszów, or they were sent to Auschwitz. This was the final day of the existence of the ghetto. Now what you see around here, what you see on the square where this all happened, you can see the memorial. You can see chairs, a very moving memorial. You can see empty chair that is symbolizing people who were supposed to be here, sit on those chairs. When I see those chairs, I'm immediately thinking of family table, of dinner. And at my family table, I have my chair where I always sit on. My father, he has his chair where he always sits. So we all have our chairs. So for me, these chairs are chairs that belong to mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters who are long gone. And this memorial, this very moving memorial, is quite new. It was established here in 2004. And from the end of the war, or from the liquidation of the ghetto till 2004, there was no memorial, nothing that would commemorate what happened here. So only in 2004, those chairs were established. You can see there are big chairs around us, but there are also smaller chairs over there. And you can see how those chairs are arranged. On this side, the chairs are facing the square. They're looking at the square. But I hope you can see that when we're filming. But the chairs on the other side, you can see they're with their backs turned to the square. And this is also something very symbolic. I mean, authors of this memorial, they decided not to give any description, not to tell people what they should get from here, but there's number of interpretation. People say are facing the square, so those on the other side can, and those here, they can symbolize us. They can symbolize non-Jewish Poles who were looking at the ghetto and their attitudes. Some of them were looking, they couldn't do that much, but at least they were looking, remembering, and trying to, pass down to the next generations the history, what happened. But there were also those who turned their backs, like the chairs here, and it was nothing. They believed It was nothing that concerned them. Now, you can also, when you look around here, maybe it's visible, maybe you don't see it. The square is not exactly flat. You know, when you walk through it, Piotr will show you that it's not flat. And the architects, people who created this memorial, they also did it on purpose. So people who walk through the square, they walk slower because they have to walk against this little slope. And this gives them little time to think about what happened here, what happened in Ghetto, what happened in the square. Let me show you here on the square also one thing. Part of the memorial, but also part of the history of the ghetto. You can see that some of these buildings here are new. If you, Piotr, show those buildings here. So of course, some things are original, but because the buildings around here, many of them after the war were not in a very good shape. Some of them were, even before the war, they were not in a very good shape. Some were demolished. Around the ghetto, especially in recent years, there are attempts to commemorate as many things as possible. So if you take a look right here, if Piotr shows us again the pavements, you can see this is exactly where the border of the ghetto was, and this is where one of the gates existed. One of the gates leading to the ghetto was located. This was a pedestrian gate, so many things were also smuggled through this gate as a pedestrian gate. It was least guarded gate. Also, something interesting that you can see here, if we, Piotr, look at the street, also at the pavement of the street, you can see that there's asphalt, but at some point, asphalt turns into cobblestone. This is something that designers of this square also did on purpose. Imagine that you are driving a car and you drive through asphalt and then you get to the cobblestone, and all of a sudden it all gets bumpy. And this is to let you know, this is to give you this clear sign that you are entering a ghetto space. If we also look that direction, you can see that street over there, and that street takes, if we walk over there, today we don't have that much time, but along that street, this is where Schindler's factory is located. Schindler's factory that was outside of the ghetto, but this is where number of people survived working for Oskar Schindler, producing pots and pans, and also ammunition or shell casings for bullets. And this is how they survived. So we'll slowly now move to another part of our ceremony, but before we do, let's look at the square, and just to sum up, so this is exactly on this spot before the liquidation of the ghetto, using the excuse of reducing overcrowding between June 1942 October 1942. Over 15,000 Jews gathered before they were sent to the killing factory to perish at Bełchatów. So in total, around 3,000 Jews were killed in Krakow's ghetto. And now we will proceed to the next part of our ceremony. So this will be the moment when we'll read out some of the names of the victims, family members of people involved with the new Cracow Friendship Society.
Thank you so much for joining us for the tour of the ghetto. It's not yet ended, but as Małgorzata said, now we're gonna be reciting the names of the family members of those who perished in the Krakow ghetto. Thank you very much, our volunteers from the Galicia Jewish Museum and the JCC, Jewish Community Center, who will be reading the names and putting the stones. This will be followed by the prayer made by Chief Rabbi of Poland, Rabbi Michael Shudri.
Hai Tenenbaum, Sarah Carmel Freili, Menashe Freili, Israel Carmel, Shlomo Leibli, Ruth Leibli, Rela Perlman, Jakob Grundmann, Hanne Malke Carmel Grundmann, Josef Carmel, Dr. Blau, Oskar Heid, Samuel Hirsch Splanlang, Estera Splanlang, Marceli Halpern, Franziska Halpern.
Ethel Lustgarten Finder, Rahel Renata Strossberg, Lea Strossberg, Dora Stossberg, Marilla Stöger, Julian Stöger, Aaron Weitscher, Mendel Menachem, Jakob and Frania Nee Spannlam Agatstein, Dalek Singer, Leon Höfstein, Anna Nee Wasserlauf Höfstein, Isa Spielmann, Kinder Nee Weigel Spielmann, Horus Mordecai Spielmann,
Anka Spielmann, Rahul Mordecai Galicia, Isaac and Paulina Kleinwachs, Maurice and Rosa Goldberg, Ferdinand Kleinwachs, Oldek and Paula Goldberg, Sila Goldberg und David Sila, Sabina Goldberg, Ignazi Israel Bau, Nina and Isaac Kries, and in memory of other victims.
As we remember all those who were murdered, our family, friends, people we never knew, but people part of Krakow and people part of the Jewish people, we say the Emalei Rachamim, the traditional Jewish memorial prayer. Emalei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamsemenu Chonochona Tachat Kan Ve'ashchina, B'malot Kedoshim, Taharim Kozareki Amasirim, את נשמות יהודי קרקוב, שהלכו לעולמם הקידוש השם. אנא בעל הרחמים, יסתרים סדר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצורכם ונשמותם. אדוני יונח נוחם ונאמן. Amen.
So we are walking now through this new section. It was modernized in 1970s, so you can see some of the new buildings around here. And when we walk, you can see that buildings here are as if, Piotr, if you could show it, buildings right here in front of us are as if they were cut with knives. Those on the other side, Piotr, please. Those here? Yes, that those buildings here are like cut with a knife. So there were buildings on this section of the ghetto that no longer exists, and this is where the office of Jewish police existed. This is also where the orphanage ghetto existed. This was the orphanage that was moved here to this district, to Podgórze, when the ghetto was established. Of course, it had existed for a long time before that, but the history of the orphanage in Krakow's ghetto is very, very sad, and also very moving. What happened? So kids in the orphanage, they were spared during the first deportation in June 1942, but not during the second deportation. When the second deportation in October 1942 started, the personnel, the director of the orphanage, David Kurzman, and teachers, among them Anna Fauerstein, they were told that they can remain in the ghetto, but the children are going to be taken. And by that point, people understood more or less what it means to be taken from the ghetto. So the personnel of the orphanage understood that the kids are going to be taken to Bełżec and are going to be murdered there. And despite they were offered a chance of surviving this deportation, that they did not decide to take this opportunity, and together with the children, they decided not to abandon the children, and they were all sent to Bełżec death camp. The orphanage was standing right here. Me and my friends decided that this is such an important story that it has to be remembered. So in 2017, we were able to put this plaque right here to commemorate from the who killed in Bełżec. Now we are reaching the place where, again, one of the gates of Krakow's ghetto existed, and we're reaching the one of the remaining fragments of the ghetto wall, two of them, careful, excuse me, there are two of them. We don't exactly the Germans did not destroy all of the walls. Why there were two fragments that were spared. Still, they're standing here and probably you already know this, that Krakow's ghetto wall had a very specific shape, like row of Jewish headstones. Now again, we don't know whose idea it was to build the wall in such shape. But when the wall was built in April 1941, right after the ghetto was established, this, for the people who were locked inside of Krakow's ghetto, was very symbolic. They were as if they were locked on the cemetery already. And here you can see the wall, you can see flowers here, you can see candles. This is exactly where ceremonies during the March of Remembrance are happening. This is where people come to pray. Let's have a quick look at the plaque here. You can see the plaque in Yiddish and in Polish. It says here they were living, suffering, and dying from the hands of the Nazis, and this was their final path leading them to death camps, because exactly this street was a street through which columns of people were leaving the ghetto on their final path towards the railway station, and then they were packed onto trains and sent to Bełżec. And during the liquidation of the ghetto, those who were leaving the ghetto through the gate here, those who survived the liquidation were then marching to Płaszów camp. So here we have another part of our ceremony. We will light candles to commemorate those who perished.
So please join us for a moment of silence while we honor the memory of the 6 millions with the lighting of 6 candles.
Weise Witten mit ihr Gosen reisen, brechen und zerblosen, starke noch die wilde Flammen, als herum Scheune brennt. Und ihr steht ohne Kota, so sich mit verlegte Hand. Und ihr steht ohne Kota, so sich unser Städtel brennt. Es brennt briedelig, es brennt. Oi, unser arme Städtel nebig brennt. Es haben schon in Feierzungen das ganze Städtelein geschlungen, und die Beise witten hoschen, unser Städtel brennt. Und ihr steht ohne Kota, so sich mit verlegte Hand. Und ihr steht und guckt, so sich unser Städtel brennt. Es brennt briedelig, es brennt. Es kann voll Lille kommen der Moment. Unser Stadt mit uns zusammen soll auf Asche weg in Flammen, bleibt soll wie auf noch a Schlacht, nur poste schwarze Welt. Und ihr steht und guckt, so sich mit verlegte Hand. Und ihr steht und guckt, so sich unser Städtel brennt. Es brennt briedelig, es brennt. Die Hilfe ist nur in euch allein gewähnt. Oi, du Städtel ist euch teuer, nehmt die Kehle, löscht das Feuer, löscht mit euer eigenem Blut, beweist, als ihr das könnt. Steht nicht Brüder und so sich mit verlegte Hand. Steht nicht Brüder, löscht das Feuer, unser Städtel brennt.
Yit Gadal v'Yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah Be'alma Divarach Hirutei V'Yamlich Malchutei בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא. ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us and to all Israel, to which we say amen.
My name is Mr. Stephen Radwin. Before we close our program with the singing of Hatikva, on behalf of the New Cracow Friendship Society, Galicia Jewish Museum, Stephen Wise Free Synagogue, and JCC Krakow, I would like to thank all of you for sharing with us this moving and memorable journey. To all of those who appeared or represented in this program, I say Yasher Koach. I would also like to acknowledge and thank all those who worked so diligently behind the scenes, who without their help, this event could not have come to fruition. Starting with Anna Schumann Gallegos, a 3G board member of the New Cracow Friendship Society, who is both the Zoom coordinator and the director of this event. Ada Kopesh Pavlovska, who is the program PR and communication manager for the Galicia Jewish Museum, who put everything together in Krakow. Aiden Gallegos, whose movie magic and syncing Esperanto to the beautiful scroll he created, from names on a page to the moving image we all witnessed. And Stephen Morris, who is the social justice program associate for the Stephen Wise Synagogue, who was instrumental in gathering the wonderful musical voices of their synagogue. I hope that all of you who shared this event with us today will also share future events with us. Hopefully, for next year's commemoration, we can gather together in person. Thank you again. Rabbi Natov, could you please do us the honor?
That's a great
Urfati Mizrach Kaidima Ein Letzion Tzofia Or Lord Atikvatinu Atikva Bachnot Alpayim Liotam Chovshi Be'artzinu Be'eretz Zion Yerushalayim Liotam Chovshi Be'artzinu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim.